Happy Patch Tuesday, everybody. Hope everyone survived the long, cold holiday season, running your skeleton crews, or just hoping to God nothing happened while you all were trying to enjoy your Christmas break. Today I have Tom Boyer, who is pretty regular on this podcast, and Seth Hoyt, who is also very big regular on this podcast. Today we've got it's kind of a light January, I would say. I don't know. What do y'all think? It's
Yeah,
pretty kind
I
of
mean,
Yeah,
yeah.
it seems pretty light to me. There are some vulnerabilities in here this patch Tuesday that, may or may not kind of give me a little pause, but in general it feels like a pretty light slash typical par for the course patch Tuesday for Windows, right? Like lots of something surprising that I don't think I've seen in a long time though is all those telephony ones, which is you know it's been years, since
Yeah.
I've
right.
seen anything related to telephony in any patch
I
updates, but that still exists in Windows apparently.
yeah. I don't think I've interacted with it in like a decade. since since the era of cloud, like there's third party cloud VoIP solutions, there's just so much easier to work with.
I know. Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry,
Absolutely.
Microsoft. Sorry.
Yeah.
um
So beyond that, no, like, scrolling through the release and everything, I didn't see anything that would particularly stand out that I'm too concerned about, right?
yeah. The only one that I see that's even being actively exploited is the Hyper-V uh, kernel integration elevation of privilege vuln.
Mm-hmm.
It's got 3 CVEs for that. Um, basically, the attacker needs access to guest system and the ability to execute code on it, and it's pretty easily worked around. If you have a good setup with your VM hosts, you can just reduce the permissions within them as a workaround. Obviously, patching any good EDR will probably pick up on some suspicious behavior like this. And then this the general rule of thumb things like isolating high value systems. But this vulnerability can easily turn into like with it, none of those mitigations in place can easily turn into like a guest to host escape situation where like basically someone gets complete control over every single one of your guest systems. So
Yeah. And that's kind of what
yeah,
I was thinking through when I read this as well. Is like, is this another breakout that you need to be concerned about? And Microsoft didn't provide too many details around the
no,
CVE itself, or if this was kind of a breakout scenario. So, I hope maybe that'll change in the coming days, or if they
yeah,
provide a better summary of what actually is going on here, because something the notes are pretty light, right? An attacker who
yeah.
successfully exploited this vulnerability could gain system privileges. Well, which system, right? Is that the guest system? Is that the hypervisor? I do wish they would have provided a little bit more detail there, but
Yeah,
you
and
know,
I always go to the worst possible scenario when I read something vague like that. Until like I get more details, you want to prepare for the worst in that kind of
yeah,
situation. But also, hopefully, when you're dealing with Hyper V, you know, you're just using best practices in that sense. Oh,
absolutely, absolutely, yeah. It's quite the scary one sometimes when you're thinking about it. Especially Hyper-V, a lot of untrusted VMs get run in Hyper-V, and if you're like if you provide compute services to customers or other untrusted vendors, then there's always that possibility that someone's in those systems doing something they shouldn't be doing, and you don't necessarily have control of those guests. So always something to
yeah.
be paranoid about.
Yep.
Oh yeah, definitely. What other ones
Yeah.
we got here today? Um, Seth, you had one. That was around Active
Yeah,
Directory.
I was looking at one. It was it's CV 21293. It's Active Directory Domain Services Privesk vulnerability. This one is could be concerning. Hasn't been exploited in the wild as of yet, but an attacker who successfully exploited this vulnerability could gain system privileges. So again, you have a full admin access situation. The way to exploit this one is basically the attacker has to have a victim open a malicious file. So again, we're getting into phishing territory. So
Yeah,
with AI these days, these phishing emails are getting pretty crafty. AI
Yeah.
has made it incredibly easy to craft these new waves of phishing emails. So they start being pretty convincing. So you get a user to click on one of these and gain access to a system, or if you get access to the actual AD server itself, you get full admin on an AD server. It's looking pretty bad. So hopefully in this situation, you do have your any of your next gen AV endpoint protection, getting your logs in the seam, things like that. Hopefully, by the time that that malicious executable is executed, it's either stopped at the door or at least picked up by an alert.
yeah,
Yeah. We all know that people, they don't use domain controllers for the most random things, right? Like browsing the internet or downloading things that they're not supposed to be
yeah.
downloading. It's put away in the closet where it should be and, protected very well, right? Like
Sure,
that's
sure. Most no one has ever gone onto a domain controller and just Googled some kind of driver update to download to it.
it is a well backed up and well protected system,
Always.
as we all know, across the
I mean,
industry. There's, yeah,
probably one
it's
of the
not
best
living
backed up.
under some desk that you're kicking every day. Not speaking from any personal experience in this regard, but
Yep. Yep.
often those critical business systems are placed in areas they're not supposed to be placed in.
I have also never worked at an organization that has leveraged Active Directory that has not backed it up properly and taken great care of it. I have also never worked at a place that hasn't synced that Active Directory to two other Active Directories.
Yeah, or
Possibly propagate those roles out that could be taken
just
over.
sometimes you got to check your email on the domain controller,
Yeah.
because you're
Yeah,
busy, right? It's
yeah.
it's hard out here, so
Well,
not a high
and it's a
bar here for
Microsoft
an
domain
attacker.
controller. So you
Yeah,
want to load your Microsoft apps on it, like your
sure.
Outlooks and
Absolutely.
oh my
Absolutely.
god, we're terrible. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. God. Well, aside from the Windows side of things, we do have a couple of you know Mac Mac vulnerabilities that are being taken care of in the most recent update as well. Is it 18.2?
Yeah, I think that's the one for iOS, but for Mac itself, the 15.2 update in
Yeah.
early mid-December shipped a bunch of fixes, and the ones that stood out to me are the WebKit ones, which I think I've talked about many, many, many times on this podcast. I feel Mac has come under increased scrutiny as it kind of takes some market share in the enterprise, and a lot of this I think comes out of that people from Google Project Zero or other initiatives are looking through WebKit and a lot of these other fundamental Mac um, applications, and diving into the security of them. And unfortunately a lot of it is like maliciously crafted websites lead to RCE, which it happens from time to time. I think in Chrome and in Firefox and a lot of these other browsers, but there's always this like at least the sentiment that I've seen through the last 5 or so years is that, you know, most of the attack vector is always like the user downloads something and then they execute it, download a malicious file, and we trick the user into executing. But these are a step up, right? All you got to do is trick them into browsing to a web page, or you host these. You take over or you buy malicious ads, and you can host like these links here, and it could lead to RCE just by navigating to a website. So it makes me a little bit more paranoid when I'm browsing around the internet and when I'm clicking around. But absolutely, if you're running Mac OS, make sure you're on the latest version on both your iPhones and your laptops and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's also such a different sentiment than like where things were like even 5 to 7 years ago around Mac OS. I feel like everyone
Yeah.
just felt cozy on the Mac, like they felt so safe, like nothing bad's gonna happen here, and
Yeah.
I think really it's just the threat was always there. People just
Hmm.
weren't digging as hard, because it just wasn't as involved in your everyday work space.
Yeah.
Like, at least not in my experience back then. But
Yeah. It
Yeah,
was a
you want to
very
get the
developer.
biggest bang for your buck when you're writing that malware. So who you're going to hit? You're
yeah,
going to hit Windows. It's so
Yeah,
yeah,
everyone's like,
exactly.
does it get viruses? It's like, well, right now it's not
yeah,
worth their time, and now we're in a
Yeah.
spot where a lot of corporations are
yeah,
picking up Macs for enterprise and everything. So yeah, that user base is growing, and so is the malware.
yeah,
Yeah,
uh,
absolutely. And I think that
yeah,
trend will continue, right? Because it is a more, I don't know, I don't want to say from an end user perspective, it's a lot easier to use a Mac. But from an
yeah,
administrator perspective, it's very difficult to maintain and manage Macs at, like in enterprise levels. So even a lot of modern EDRs are very tuned for Windows specific threats and Windows specific environments, and oftentimes Mac is kind of a best effort, which
yeah,
you know leaves much to be desired. But it's kind of, as administrators and as security professionals that have Macs in the enterprise, right? Like those threats are there and are real and are increasing. So having that kind of threat landscape in your mind and understand how they're approaching attacking Mac is really important to start thinking about.
yeah. Definitely when it comes to like tuning like your SIEM, like good detection engineering around your endpoints. I mean, it's kind of paramount at this stage of the game until like kind of some of that stuff catches up. Um, I think that's just kind of been one of the more things that I think about like more recently about Macs as we try to manage our own, endpoints here. That's like
Hmm.
the detection engineering that we write internally is sometimes a few steps ahead of what is being just kind of automatically pushed through like an EDR or some tool set like that.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
yeah. But yeah, I think that kind of brings us to the end of this week's podcast, but we really want to thank you all for tuning in. Stay safe out there and stay patched. But
Happy New Year, everyone.
Happy New
Happy
Year.
New Year.